There's a point in every garden project when you stop saying, "Oh, look how nicely that's filling in," and you start saying, "Who gave the squash permission to be over there?" Because this garden has entered that phase. The cosmos is coming through other plants. The blanket flower is leaning into everything. The basil has flowered, gone to seed. It's invited insects over and stopped consulting me altogether. And then there are the hops. Those started several years ago around an old hot house frame. I covered the frame with cattle panels and let the hop vines climb it. And every spring they come up the sides, across the roof, over the top, and by summer the old structure is completely covered, and underneath it, shade, real estate. A little outdoor room where we can sit and entertain while the hop vines grow over our heads. We call it the hop house, which is what happens when you give a perennial vine real estate and you don't read the lease very carefully. But that hop house is where this whole garden really began. I built the soil there first with lots of organic matter, compost, plant material, roots, years of putting carbon and nutrients back instead of hauling it away with the trash. The soil changed, and then I had enough compost and enough biomass to start building outward. One section became another and another. So when you look around this yard today, you're not looking at one finished landscape. You're actually looking at different ages of an ecosystem. Some areas have been developing for years and some are relatively new. Some look glorious and some look like they need a lawyer, but that's construction. And one of the biggest changes is density. Plants touch here a lot. Conventional landscaping trained us to be nervous about that. We like to plant a single specimen in the middle of a circle and mulch around it. Nothing touches, nothing leans. Everything is 6 feet apart with excellent boundaries. Essentially, we landscape the yard like a waiting room. Plant communities don't work like waiting rooms, they like to overlap. A low plant covers the ground while something taller grows through it. A flowering plant occupies the middle, and another reaches above it. A hop vine leaves the entire discussion and goes vertical. The underground, the same thing is happening in another dimension. Roots are spreading at different depths. Some are fibrous, some travel further, and some stay super close to the surface. And those living roots are not just drinking water and waiting for fertilizer. They are interacting with the entire biological community around them. The region immediately surrounding a root, the rhizosphere, is one of the busiest neighborhoods in the soil. Plants send carbon compounds into it, microorganisms gather around it, and nutrients move through it. So when you see a densely planted bed above ground and think, gosh, that looks really crowded. Yeah, there's a whole second city underneath it saying, crowded? This is just Tuesday. Charles Darwin was already experimenting with the idea of plant diversity in the 19th century, and the basic observation was amazing. Mixtures of plants could sometimes produce more vegetables than the same area occupied by fewer kinds of plants. Doesn't mean you simply buy 14 plants and jam them together and receive an ecosystem with your receipt. The important thing is that different species can use the site differently. Different heights, different root patterns, different growing seasons, different flowering periods, and different relationships with nutrients and soil organism. So diversity isn't just, oh look, I bought one of everything. That's a nursery addiction. We're discussing functional diversity. What jobs are being done? So look at this garden. We have low flowering plants. They're protecting the soil. Cosmos are later in the season and they're rising above it. Blanket flowers bloom, fade, make seed, and just keep standing. Hollyhocks grow vertical, basil flowers. And now instead of being useful only to me, it's useful to insects. The squash spreads enormous leaves across the soil like it's been personally offended by the sunlight touching the ground. And the Vista hop sends her binds up to the top of the hop house and builds a roof. These plants are not interchangeable, and that's the whole point. And Utah sends wild weather. It's late August here, and in a minute you're going to see we got a hailstorm. Yep, we're starting to cool. In Utah, we have a lot of heat, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, a lot of dry air, wind, and hailstorms. You spend months building a garden, and one afternoon the sky says, "Oh, how cute." This is another reason diversity matters, because a diverse garden can be damaged. Of course, it can. But everything does not necessarily respond in exactly the same way. One species struggles while another continues. One flower finishes while another one begins. One plant occupies shallow soil while another explores somewhere deeper. Biological diversity spreads the workload and spreads some of the risk. It's the ecological version of not letting your entire financial future depend on one little tomato plant. And now here's where things get interesting. When these plants finish growing, I don't remove their contribution for the system. Look at the hops. All summer, those binds create an enormous amount of plant tissue leaves, binds, cones, roots, and then I cut them back. And this is where it gets a pile of biomass. Yesterday's roof, today's raw material. This is not the end of the plant's usefulness. It's a change of assignment. The material dries, it breaks down, it covers soil, microorganisms work on it, and carbon gets returned to the nutrient cycle. And next year's growth begins in soil partially built from the remains of previous growth. Now we're getting somewhere. And no, the garden is not always pretty while this happens, but that's okay. Because ecosystems don't come out of a box finished. There are gaps, there are awkward stages, and there are plants that I will move, there are plants that won't work, and bare areas waiting for next year. There are areas where the biology has had years to build its momentum, and newer sections that have barely started. That's what I want you to see. It's not a perfect garden, but the progression. Because the question changes as the ecosystem develops. You stop walking around and asking, what plant would look nice here? And you start asking, what is missing? Ground cover? Roots? Flowers later in the season? More organic matter? More vertical structure? More biomass to bring back down? A plant that does something that others are not doing. Now you're not decorating, you're assembling a community. And communities are complicated. They touch, they compete, they cooperate, they grow into each other, and they change. And every once in a while, you have to remind the squash that the pathway is still technically a pathway. This garden isn't finished, not even close. The oldest part is showing me what the newer parts can become. The newer parts are producing material for whatever comes next. And that's the whole idea. We aren't buying a finished ecosystem, we're growing one. Why? Because healthy soil grows healthy ecosystems. And around here, we're just getting started. This video has been brought to you by Chronicles of Living Soil in conjunction with 2x2 Serenity. Go find your day.